Welcome to Inspirational Journeys, everyone. My name is Ann Harrison, and before we get started, I do want to apologize. The person I had told you was coming up next, she was not able to make it due to COVID, but she will be back at some point. But I do have a special guest for you this week. Today, I would like to welcome one of my all-time favorite authors, Robin Lee Hatcher. Welcome to the show, Robin.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for coming to the show, and I'm blessed to have you. I've been praying about this for quite a while. So first of all, why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners and the viewers out there?
All right. Well, I'm Robin Lee Hatcher. I've been writing fiction for 40 years now. 40 years ago, I started writing my first novel that was published 3 years after I started it. And I'm currently working on revisions for what will be my 85th release. So I've been writing a lot over those years. I'm a mom of 2 and a grandmother of 6 and a great grandmother of 1.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Took me a little while to get used to that great grandmother, because my mom sure did seem old when she became a great grandmother, and I don't think I'm very old. I currently write for HarperCollins Christian Publishing under the Thomas Nelson imprint. I also have some indie books out that are basically just backlist, most of them backlist titles. And I also, on the side, do a little website design for other authors. And that pretty much describes my life, writing and being involved in the writing community.
Sounds to me like you got your irons in quite a few fires there, Robin.
I do. In fact, I failed to mention I'm also a very part-time college student.
Oh, wow.
I never got a degree when I was younger. I got married and had kids. So I decided, I was at a graduation ceremony actually, and all my life I've said, I'm going to go when I have time. And as I was sitting there, I realized you'll never have time. You have to make time. So I went right home from that graduation ceremony and I started the application process. So it's going to take me forever to get my degree, just forever, because you can't get there very fast when you just get a few credits each semester.
Right.
But I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, and at least it's one thing off your bucket list, right?
That's right. That's right.
Oh gosh. Okay. So what inspired you to be a writer? Let's start with that.
Well, I always have been in love with the written word. I grew up in a household. My dad died when I was an infant, but my mom and my grandmother and my older brother, they were always reading, and I always saw them with books. So I went off to the first day of first grade to learn to read. And they didn't teach me the first day, and I was very upset and said I wasn't going to bother to go back. But Mom made sure I went back and I learned how to read. And I started scribbling, bad poetry and little stories here and there when I was a kid, but I didn't really think of it as something that I wanted to do as like a profession. I actually loved the theater, which is just another form of storytelling, of course, and did quite a little bit of acting in my teen years and 20s. But towards the end of my 20s, I had this idea rolling around in my head for a Civil War novel. I loved to read the big historical sagas that were popular at the time. And so that was sort of the idea that I had. And then 3 things happened. I was doing a newsletter for a horse association, and I got really bored with writing articles like "Winter's coming, give your horse more grain." So I started writing more creative pieces like what my filly looked like running beside the mare through the snow and things like that. So although they were nonfiction, they were still more creative. Mm-hmm. Then there was an article in the newspaper about a woman in my city who had sold her first novel. And not too long after that, I read a book that I was very unhappy with the ending. It just really disappointed me. And I thought to myself, well, if that can get published, I could get published. Which of course, when you've never done it before, you don't know how arrogant that actually is.
Tell me about it.
It's so much harder than you think it will be. But that's what made me decide to put my money where my mouth is, as they say. And I started writing my first book, and I wrote it longhand on yellow legal pads, and then I used the office typewriter at work during coffee breaks and lunch hours, and would type the pages that I wrote the night before. And 9 months later, I had my first book written, and I've been pretty much at it ever since. I worked a full-time job while writing until the month my 9th book was published. And then I decided to take the chance of seeing if I could make it as a writer full-time.
Wow. I bet that was difficult writing writing while having a full-time job. I bet that was difficult.
Oh, it was. I wrote evenings from 7 to 9, Monday through Thursday. I was a single mom with preteens. And so we would have dinner, and then I would go down to write, and weekends and Friday nights were reserved for family. But it works. If you really want to do it, you can get it done.
Yep, that's true. I have to admit that. Okay, so, and I noticed you've done not only historical fiction, but the dual time books too. Which is harder to write, historical fiction or dual time?
Well, actually, I've written straight contemporary, straight historical, and dual time.
Okay.
And I love writing them all. The main thing with dual time fiction is that even if one has a lesser length than the other, both stories need to have the same weight of importance. That's probably the trickiest part, is to make sure they both have equal weight, even if they don't have equal length. In fact, I love dual time. I love reading it. But one of the things I love about writing dual time is that I get to write both contemporary and historical. And so it satisfies that joy in me to do both kinds of fiction.
Like the 2 stories in one. So let's talk about your process for a minute. Are you a pantser or a plotter, or kind of somewhere in between?
I'm definitely a pantser. I'm very much seat of the pants. I'm an intuitive writer. I feel the stories more than I see the stories. I get up, one of my favorite things to say is that I get up in the morning to discover what's going to happen next in my book, the same way a reader later will read the book to find out what happens next. So one of the things I learned early in my career is if I write out a detailed synopsis or plot, I don't want to write the book anymore because I already know the ending. And so I'm bored with it. I want to move on to something else. So I have learned to accept the way that God created me to create. And every writer looks for an easier way to write a book. We all think there must be a better way or an easier way than the way we do it. And of course, after so many years, I discovered that there is no easier way. A plotter struggles with getting it written the same way I struggle with getting my books written, maybe over different things, but it's still work to make a novel come together the way it's supposed to. And so one of the things a writer has to learn is what works for me, and then accept that as this is my creative process.
Right. So, do your characters talk to you? I know a lot of us writers have that.
Yeah, my characters are, my books are definitely character driven rather than plot driven. And my characters are very real people to me, and only another writer truly understands. Well, I think readers understand because we fall in love with characters in other books. So, so in that sense, both readers and writers understand, but they are very real to me, and they're very individual. And yes, they do talk to me at times. I've had a book begin by hearing a character speaking a line, and I rushed to write it down because I knew that it was a line that this character was going to say in a brand new book that I hadn't figured out who everybody was yet. But the hero was already speaking to me.
So how do you get to know your characters? Let's talk about character development for a minute. How do you get to know your characters? Do you interview them? Do you profile them? Or do you just follow along as they give you the inspiration for or tell you what needs to be put in a novel?
It's kind of a combination, but at first, I may write up to 3 or 4 or even 5 chapters of a book, and by then I usually will stop, and I don't interview them, but I use stream of consciousness writing, and I write first person autobiographies in all of the main characters' point of view from birth until the opening of the novel. So I might write something like, my name is Jane Smith. I was born on such and such a date in such and such a city. My dad did this and my mom did that. When I was 5, I hit my brother over the head with a toy truck, and they had to take him to the hospital. And I just this is writing that's fun. It's not for anybody to judge. It isn't. You don't have to impress anybody. And I'm a firm believer that most of my stories are already down deep in my subconscious. And so this is all about giving that subconscious the freedom to pour it out. And I tend to do this with pen and paper rather than on my computer. For some reason that feels a little bit more, I guess, personal. I'm able to get into the voice and the head of that character better for some reason. Sometimes paper and pen just feels nice. But that's my process. And then what I have discovered is that without knowing it, I will have, because we as people are the sum total of everything that has happened to us in the past. So our motivation and the reasons we react in any given way is because of our past. And so I am seeking to discover my character's past so that I'll know how they'll behave in my story and why they'll react a certain way to something that happens or something another character says. And so that's what these autobiographies are all about, is discovering who they were up to the point that the story opens.
Wow, it kind of reminds me of the way I do it, because right now I'm in revisions for one of my novels that I'm actually rebranding, and I thought I knew about the characters, but when I started doing character profiles to ask them questions about their past and why they did something a certain way, I was surprised to find out more about my characters that I had no idea. It's interesting when you start doing biographies or profiles or interviews and that kind of thing. That's when it gets really fun and interesting.
Yeah, it absolutely, that's right. And like I said, they're very real people to me. When I wrote my first novel that was in first person, and it was based on experiences from my own past. And so I purposely set the book in the 1950s so that it wouldn't be me, so that I wasn't prone to make the protagonist me, because I wanted her to be who she was, not who I am. Right. And so there are ways to, as writers, there's a piece of us in every character we create, including our villains, because we can't help it. That's how we understand and empathize and sympathize is because we're able to reach into ourselves and discover those emotions and feelings. And but we have to allow our characters to be themselves, and we can't manipulate them. When we try to manipulate them to do something, it never serves a good purpose.
No, it really doesn't. Because I had to put a story aside that I was working on because I couldn't. My characters just quit talking to me. I understand that well, very well. And then I was looking at the one I'm working on for the writing method that I've created called the plot stitch for crochet, for the crochet writers out there, or crafty writers, or whatever you want to call them. And I was starting to that, and then my main character, Becca Martin, she called. She's like, "Come back and finish my story." It's like she was calling me back. Have you ever had that happen?
Well, I've been tempted to revisit characters again. Yeah.
Because they call you back.
Or having a hard time letting go of them. Finishing a novel and they continue to talk to you. I had one story where my heroine was from Ireland, and so she had that very specific way of talking and that inflection. And I heard her voice in my head for months after I was done with that book.
She probably wanted you to write another story or a sequel to it. I mean, that doesn't surprise me. But so when you do your historical or your dual time, how much research do you do before you start the book, or do you research as you go?
I mostly research as I go, but then of course I've been at this for a lot of years, many books. So there's a lot that I already know. And whether it's contemporary or historical, every book you're researching all the time.
Yeah.
Naturally, the internet has made life so much easier for writers. Now we can't trust everything we read on the internet. So you have to do some follow-up, but oftentimes you can find little facts and dates. Like I remember back before the internet, I had a really close relationship with the reference librarians, and would call them. And when I've written one medieval book, and I needed to know if they were using forks yet. And to be real honest, it wasn't a desperate need for the plot for the book. I didn't really have to know, but all of a sudden I wanted to write this scene, and I realized I did not know what utensils they would be using yet. Were they only wooden spoons, or had they invented forks yet? And I wasted hours and hours and hours when I could have been writing. I should have just put a parentheses and said, find out, later. But
insert cutlery type.
Yeah, exactly. But I waited for hours for the reference librarian to get back to me, and she did get back to me and they weren't using it at the time of my story yet. It was about another 75 years before forks came into existence. But these days, you generally can at least get a glimpse of something that you go researching for on the internet, and then you can go and dive in deeper someplace to get more details on it. But there's always something I'm stopping for. My current book that I'm revising right now is a dual time where the historical story is taking place during World War II. And there's some information that my editor said, I would like to know more information about this. And so that's something that I'm going to have to, as I get closer to that period. I know some of this, but to actually put it into the story in the way that she wants it, I'm going to have to dig deeper and get a little bit more information. So I love history. History is one of my favorite things, and so that's never a chore. In fact, one of the things I've learned and I bet this is true of most historical writers, is that it would be easy to never actually get to writing your stories, because as you research, you find out more and you find out something more, and then you find out something else, and you
Yeah, you can go
follow
down a
these rabbit
hole.
trails.
Yeah. And have you ever noticed when you're doing research, so because this has actually happened to me while I'm working on this book that I'm revising. You ever notice when you do your research that sometimes the research you do can change the trajectory of your story, can change the shape of it?
Absolutely, it certainly can. You find out something, and that you, especially as a seat of the pants writer, um, it's easy for me to suddenly go, oh, this makes sense. This is something that actually will work really well in the story that I had not seen coming.
Or because I was going to put a couple of flashbacks in mine, and then I was talking to my brother-in-law who's a nurse, and we started talking about some things because I pantsed it the first time, and now I'm starting to kind of do a little bit more character development and a little more plot development with it. And so when I did the research, I'm like, wait a minute, this is not going to work. This scene's not going to work. So I have to take out some stuff, and I had to write a whole new first chapter. I think I've got to write another second chapter before the journey actually starts. So yeah.
I've been, even though I'm a pantser, James Scott Bell is a good friend of mine, and he loves to tease about pantsers getting lost and having to find their way back. And I would say that really has never happened to me. So again, I fall back to believing that so much of my storytelling is in my subconscious. And so I've already worked these things out that I may not realize I've worked out. And so I've never had to go back and start in a new place. I generally can say that out of all these books, my opening scenes, at least 99% of the time, have stayed. I mean, the chapter itself may have changed, but the opening scene, the opening where I'm placing the book, has stayed the same. So I don't tend to get lost, but I do a lot of walking around. I do a lot of thinking. I do a lot of I keep what I call a rolling journal, where I can sit down and, like in the morning, just sort of write thoughts of, this is what happened yesterday. This is what I need to see happen. I tend to describe it like the lights on a car driving at night. The lights only show the highway, X number of yards or feet in front of you, but it's enough to get you down the highway. You can't see all the way to your destination, but you can see the road enough to stay safe. And
Right.
so I can see my story falling far enough ahead to stay safe and in my lane, even if I can't see the end.
Right. And I think the more I write, the better I'll get at this, and won't have to change so much. But for this rebranding process, it's my research has actually changed things. But okay, so now that we've talked about the research, which I want to get into your, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I want to talk about a little bit about the new book, Make You Feel My Love, because you just put that out. That just came out on the 13th, which is last Tuesday.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that, as much as you want to talk about it.
Sure. Well, the two heroines of it, this really is a two romance novel. Sometimes the secondary story is not a romance. They'll be the main story. The contemporary tends to be, in my books, the romance, where the historical part may not be a romantic story. But in Make You Feel My Love, they definitely are two romances. And Chelsea is the contemporary heroine, and Cora is the historical heroine. And both of them are escaping abusive relationships. Cora with her father, who is verbally and emotionally abusive, and Cora from a from a boyfriend who is physically abusive, and they both find escape in the small mountain town called Chickadee Creek in Idaho, and so it's a healing journey for both of them, and the heroes both play a big part in the heroine's healing process, and their faith, of course, plays a very important part of that healing as well.
And I encourage you guys to go out, that y'all listening and watching out there, I encourage you to go out there and get that. Robbie, if you want to show that off for the video, you
Sure, I can do that.
Go ahead and do that so that people can see that. Yeah, you guys want to read that, because I was intrigued. I noticed that the two abusive relationships, and the heroes are basically from the same family, just different generations. I noticed that too. Liam and
yes, that's right. Yeah, Liam and Preston.
Yeah. And I could see that.
And there's a violin, the violin that was Cora's 100 years before, plays a part in Chelsea and Liam looking into his past, and so that's that instrument becomes a part of the healing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love to listen to the violin. Not that I would ever learn how to play it, because I probably wouldn't be able to, but you know, who knows what God calls me to do one of these days. But no, I absolutely love that. I'm like, wow. And adding the musical, I don't know if you want to call it theme or whatever, to the book, that was amazing too. So I encourage you to go out and get that. It released last Tuesday. So yeah. So congratulations on the new release.
Thank you.
So before we close, first of all, where can people find you online?
My website is robinleehatcher.com, ROBINLEEHATCHER.com. And that, of course, is the best place to go, the easiest one to remember. And from there, you can connect with me on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. And I have a channel on YouTube, but it's not very active, and it doesn't tend to relate to writing very often. So that's available via my website as well. But that isn't where I'm connecting the most with readers.
Oh, okay. Okay, that is so cool. So thank you so much for being on my show today. This is an answer to prayer, because I've always loved your work, and I think I don't remember what the name of the book was, but there was one book in the Americana series that I started with, and then from there I've just been reading, gosh, I don't know how many, since like 97, I think, off and on. So yeah, this is absolutely a pleasure. Do you have any last parting advice for new writers out there?
Well, my advice to new writers is very simple. I say read, and I mean read everything. Read outside of your preferred genres. Really explore everything, nonfiction and fiction, and then write. If you write 1 page a day, you'll have a 365-page novel at the end of a year. So don't let yourself get overwhelmed by how many words you have to write. Just pay attention to what you want to write today. Wow.
Have you ever tried National Novel Writing Month by any chance?
You cut out a little bit, but I think you were asking about NaNoWriMo.
Yes, NaNoWriMo.
Okay. I have, I started to do it 1 year, but the fact is that I was in the middle of revisions, and so it just didn't fit my schedule, and then I just never tried again. And it's because I tend to write, because I edit constantly as I'm working, trying to make myself write 50,000 words in a month is not the best way for me to meet my deadlines, because I work in a different way.
Okay, and I know that in April and July they do the Camp NaNoWriMo sessions, and you can set your own goals. They used to do like different hour page hour page. I wish they would do chapter line minutes. They used to have the different goals for that, and right now we're in the middle of the July camp session for this year, and I actually use that for revisions. I have a project called Anything Goes. So yeah, so that's fun. I just didn't know if you had actually done that before. So would you like to close us out in prayer?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Oh, Father God, I just come to you and ask for you to encourage the listeners to this program as they try to write their books. Father, would you guide them? Would you lift them? Would you fill them with words that are worth sharing with the world? Father, we don't want to write just to write. We want to write so that we honor you with both words and thought and deed. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. So we challenge you today, everybody, to go out there and read to get inspired, like Robin has advised us to do. Write something inspiring and share your creation with the world. For when you've touched one life, you've touched thousands. Thanks for joining us on Inspirational Journeys, and have a blessed day.